Carl Jung unearthed a psychological truth that continues to profoundly unsettle modern therapeutic practice. Genuine awakening is neither peaceful nor is it a state of pure bliss. It is a fundamental, terrifying catastrophe that often alienates and frightens those in one's immediate vicinity. During his most productive years, Jung formalized this discovery into a theoretical framework, documenting 7 unmistakable indicators that signal an authentic state of awakening, differentiating it from mere spiritual performance. These signs were so disruptive to conventional norms that Jung referred to them as a psychological protocol, a critical warning system. Observing all 7 in an individual suggests that you are not witnessing someone who has achieved a conventional form of enlightenment. Rather, you are engaging with a person who has become psychologically perilous to the integrity of the collective unconscious. Yet, what chilled Jung the most was the quiet nature of this transformation. The truly awakened do not seek validation or announce their status. They simply exist in a manner that renders the unexamined, or sleeping, world acutely uncomfortable. Today, we will delineate the precise 7 signs Jung identified, explore why he considered this knowledge intrinsically dangerous, and detail the consequences of completing this harrowing personal metamorphosis. This discussion bypasses simplistic self-help rhetoric and superficial social media enlightenment. It concerns a psychological condition so rare and so potentially threatening that established society often instinctively works to neutralize or destroy the person who embodies it. Consider a composite clinical profile illustrating Jung's initial discovery. A man presented at a consultation, appearing outwardly normal, even possessing a certain social charm, successful career, stable family, seemingly well-adjusted by all societal metrics. However, a profound shift became immediately apparent during the intake session. The patient displayed total indifference toward the therapist's opinion of him. This was not born of rebellion or anger. He simply operated beyond the need for external approval or judgment. This radical self-sufficiency constituted the first signal in Jung's framework, the complete, irreversible dissolution of the persona. The persona is the mandatory social mask we craft to navigate civilization. The tailored version of ourselves presented to secure validation, avoid confrontation, and maintain social integration. Most people inextricably link their identity to this persona. They have worn the mask for so long they have forgotten the authentic self underneath. The truly awakened individual, however, has witnessed the complete collapse of this facade. While they can still function in social settings when necessary, they no longer identify with the performance. Jung's writings illustrate how individuals in this state perceive social interactions as watching a play in which they are no longer invested. They follow the script perfectly, yet feel utterly detached from the role. This psychological distance is precisely why awakened individuals are so unsettling to others. They function as mirrors, reflecting the observer's own attachment to performance. When speaking with them, one feels seen. Their gaze penetrates the superficial persona to the core reality beneath. This experience is often intolerable for the vast majority. The awakened are frequently mislabeled as cold, overly critical, or aloof. However, they are not passing judgment. They have merely ceased playing the social game, and their sheer presence serves as a harsh reminder that you, the observer, are still performing. Jung observed an even more disquieting consequence in these patterns. When the persona disintegrates, the individual ceases to prioritize social validation entirely. They exist in a state of complete neutrality regarding how they are perceived. This generates immense group anxiety, because humans are fundamentally wired to strive for social status. An awakened person who genuinely lacks concern for external status cannot be manipulated by shame, guilt, or collective pressure. They become immune to the very mechanisms that regulate and sustain collective unconsciousness. An individual who has shed their persona becomes psychically opaque to social hierarchies. They may attend gatherings, but they register zero emotional investment in status competitions. This profound indifference is not contempt. It is authentic freedom from the imposed necessity of being perceived in any particular way. But that is not the most alarming element. The second sign Jung identified was even more psychologically destabilizing. The awakened person has achieved the complete acceptance of their shadow. They possess an absolute, unwavering certainty that they are capable of embodying every act of evil they perceive in others. This is not self-loathing. It is radical, unblinking self-knowledge. Based on Jung's composite observations, individuals in this state can discuss their inherent capacity for manipulation, cruelty, or violence with the same calm neutrality they would use to describe the weather. The awakened person has stopped fleeing their inner darkness. They have stared directly at every destructive impulse, every selfish desire, and every dark potential within themselves and concluded, yes, this, too, is me. The result is a terrifying, unflappable calmness. They cannot be shocked by human depravity because they recognize its blueprint within their own psyche. They cannot be controlled through appeals to moral superiority because they have permanently abandoned the self-deceptive fantasy of being inherently good. Jung noted that this shadow integration causes awakened individuals to appear fundamentally alien. When someone confesses a shameful action or dark thought, most people react with immediate judgment or insincere reassurance. The awakened person responds with immediate recognition. They know that darkness intimately, having achieved internal peace with it. This is why people frequently confess secrets to awakened individuals they would never share elsewhere. They fear no judgment, because the awakened person has already recognized and accepted that same darkness within themselves. Crucially, accepting the shadow does not lead to evil. It leads to consciousness. They can choose their actions deliberately, rather than being unconsciously driven by repressed content. Jung concluded that the truly dangerous individuals are those convinced they harbor no shadow. They commit atrocities while maintaining an iron conviction in their own moral righteousness. The awakened person, aware of their shadow, acts with genuine morality because that morality is a conscious choice, not an unconscious performance. Empaths are broken. They're alchemists in progress. The third sign manifests as a distinct paradox. The awakened individual often retreats from society, but this withdrawal is not a symptom of depression. They retreat because the sheer noise of the sleeping world has become psychically unbearable. Consider a narrative illustration. An individual in this psychological state describes feeling physically exhausted after even brief time spent in groups. The unspoken collective agreements, the necessary participation in games, and the maintenance of shared delusions require a constant depleting energy expenditure. Solitude, therefore, is not an escape. It is a vital act of self-restoration. This withdrawal often terrifies family and friends, leading to panic and staging interventions, as it resembles mental illness. Yet, the awakened person is not withdrawing from genuine connection. They are withdrawing from performance. They have simply ceased participating in the collective theater of unconsciousness. This creates profound existential loneliness because most human interaction is predicated on shared unconscious assumptions. Jung observed that awakened people typically build very small circles of deep, genuine connection, rather than expansive networks of shallow acquaintances. They prioritize depth over breadth. One conversation with another conscious person holds infinitely more value than 100 interactions with people still trapped in their personas. This fierce selectivity is often misconstrued as arrogance or superiority. It is, in fact, radical honesty. The awakened person refuses to pretend that unconscious relationships are fulfilling. They prefer genuine solitude over fabricated connection. But here is where the transformation becomes truly hazardous. The fourth sign Jung identified was the absolute loss of projection. The awakened person ceases blaming others for their internal experience of reality. If something about another person triggers discomfort, they immediately inquire what that agitation reveals about their own inner landscape. This makes them fundamentally impossible to manipulate through emotional victimhood or guilt. Most individuals exist in a state of constant projection, attributing their problems to their parents, their unhappiness to their partners, or their limitations to their circumstances. The awakened person stops this process entirely. If they feel distress, they ask what internal mechanism requires adjustment. This does not mean they tolerate abuse, but rather that they respond consciously instead of reacting impulsively. Jung noted that the loss of projection generates massive friction in relationships. When you attempt to make an awakened person responsible for your feelings, they simply refuse. Not aggressively or defensively, but neutrally. They will not carry your projection. They reflect it back to you clearly and without judgment, forcing you to confront your own inherent responsibility for your emotional state. Most people find this unbearable. They accuse the awakened person of being cold or uncaring. But the reality is the awakened person has ceased participating in unconscious emotional contracts. Imagine attempting to guilt-trip someone who takes full ownership of their own emotional experience. You state that they hurt you. They ask what within you was hurt and why. You claim they made you angry. They inquire what triggered your anger and what it reveals about your unmet needs. You declare them difficult. They remain calm, curious about your reaction. This process is intensely infuriating to anyone attempting to transfer their inner chaos onto another individual. The awakened person functions as a perfect mirror, reflecting everything back to its source. The fifth sign is perhaps the most socially devastating. Society pathologizes the awakened as mentally ill. Jung's framework documents how genuinely individuated individuals are frequently diagnosed with mental disorders simply because they no longer adhere to the collective delusion. They question the consensus reality and see through arbitrary social constructs. To those still unconscious, this perspective often registers as a form of psychosis. Consider the definition of normal. It signifies conforming to collective unconsciousness. An awakened person, who no longer participates in these delusions, appears definitionally crazy. Jung understood this was not an oversight in the system, but an inherent feature. The collective unconscious defends itself by pathologizing and neutralizing those who threaten its established equilibrium. This creates a profound double bind. If they speak their truth openly, they risk institutionalization or compliance via medication. If they hide their consciousness to appear normal, they suffer a deep, corrosive inauthenticity. Most choose a strategic middle path. They learn to speak the language of the sleeping world when necessary, while fiercely guarding their true awareness in private. This is not deceit, it is strategic survival. Jung termed this conscious adaptation, contrasting it with unconscious conformity. The awakened person becomes adept at code switching between worlds. At work, they use the approved vocabulary and follow the required social scripts. In solitude, they allow themselves to perceive reality clearly. They become bilingual in consciousness, speaking the language of both sleep and awakening. While this skill allows them to function, it also deepens their isolation, as they are perpetually translating and bridging two worlds that are incapable of mutual understanding. The sixth sign concerns absolute emotional autonomy. The awakened person is immune to emotional manipulation and gaslighting. When someone attempts to deny their lived experience, the awakened person simply observes the manipulation attempt without being internally moved or swayed by it. This characteristic makes them profoundly threatening to anyone who relies on emotional control for power. This emotional autonomy is forged through deep shadow work. Once you have fully integrated your own capacity for manipulation, you instantly recognize it in others. This creates an impenetrable psychological boundary. Manipulators find no purchase. Their routine tactics are simply ineffective. However, this autonomy does not equate to being heartless. Awakened individuals can feel profound empathy without adopting others' suffering as their own. They can offer steadfast support without becoming entangled. This type of bounded compassion often confuses people who equate healthy psychological boundaries with emotional coldness. We see this dynamic clearly in entrenched relationship patterns. A family member attempts the familiar manipulative tactics that worked for decades, the guilt trips, the emotional blackmail, the selective rewriting of history. The awakened person listens calmly, acknowledges the feelings being expressed, but crucially, does not absorb the projected responsibility. They remain rooted in their own reality. To the manipulator, this feels like an act of severe betrayal. How dare you refuse to participate in the dysfunction anymore? How dare you accurately recall events instead of accepting my version? How dare you remain centered when I am trying to create chaos? The seventh and final sign is what Jung termed the return. Following the essential withdrawal and the successful shadow integration, The awakened person eventually re-engages with the world, yet they do not return to conform. They return to observe and engage from a place of awareness, not identification. Jung observed that this phase is the most dangerous. The awakened person now possesses fully integrated gifts. They can read individuals with staggering accuracy and perceive manipulation patterns before they fully form. An awakened individual with malicious intent would be devastatingly effective. An awakened person operating from compassionate intent becomes what Jung designated a culture carrier. But the essential reason the truly awakened pose a threat to the collective unconscious is this: they cannot be controlled. Social pressure is ineffective. Shame holds no leverage. Status games bore them. Emotional manipulation simply slides off. The standard mechanisms used to enforce conformity to collective delusions have zero power over an individual who has completed the process of individuation. This is why social groups instinctively attempt to dismantle awakened individuals. Not consciously or deliberately, but the collective unconscious perceives a severe threat and mobilizes to eliminate it. Jung's framework demonstrates how awakened people frequently become scapegoats in their families, workplaces, and communities. They are blamed for problems they merely reflect, accused of causing discomfort they expose, and systematically pushed out of systems they sought to help. This is not personal antagonism. It is the collective unconscious defending itself against the light of consciousness. An awakened person in a family reveals all the unspoken dysfunctions. An awakened person in a corporation exposes all the collective delusions. An awakened person in a community threatens all the shared, unconscious agreements that sustain the group's functioning. This is why Jung deemed this knowledge dangerous. Once you recognize these 7 signs in yourself, regression to unconsciousness is impossible. You cannot pretend not to see what you see. You cannot sustain a persona you have fundamentally outgrown. You become permanently marked by consciousness in a world that primarily rewards unconsciousness. You become a threat to the collective delusion, simply by existing authentically. This is the profound burden of awakening, gaining radical freedom alongside radical isolation. Yet, Jung also uncovered a beautiful truth in his decades of research. Those who completed this profound transformation reported a depth of meaning and authenticity that unconscious people never experience. They may be isolated from the collective, but they are never alone with themselves. They trade the transient comfort of shared delusion for the fierce, enduring joy of perceiving reality without distortion. This is a trade most people will vehemently refuse. But for those who find they have no alternative, for those who have awakened, intentionally or otherwise, Jung offered a concrete path forward. The path Jung charted is individuation, the conscious integration of every psychic reality discovered through the process of awakening. It is the mastery of holding one's shadow without being overcome by it, the development of emotional sovereignty without becoming cold or detached, the skill of seeing through collective delusion without devolving into superiority or bitterness. It is the conscious return to the world, fully awake. This path is not peaceful. Jung was absolutely explicit. Individuation is a type of psychological crucifixion. You must experience the death of the person you believed yourself to be to successfully become who you authentically are. But Jung believed this crucifixion serves a vital, evolutionary purpose. Every person who successfully completes individuation makes consciousness marginally more available to the whole. Every awakened individual proves that humanity can transcend collective unconsciousness. Every person who integrates their shadow reduces the latent shadow content within the collective psyche. This is not self-aggrandizement. It is psychological evolution. Consciousness must originate somewhere. It begins with individuals brave enough, or perhaps broken enough, to stop performing and to simply start being. The truly awakened person Jung described is neither a guru nor a saint. They are someone compelled by circumstance or conscious choice to confront and integrate every dimension of their own psyche. They have lost their persona, and in doing so, they have finally found their self. Having embraced their shadow, these individuals have secured genuine psychological freedom. They consciously disengaged from widespread collective delusion and re-emerged anchored in genuine awareness. This inner sovereignty renders them impervious to manipulation, control,
or capture by unconscious systems. Consequently, their presence poses a threat to the collective unconscious, while simultaneously being crucial for the evolution of consciousness itself.
If these 7 signs resonate within you, Carl Jung offered a profound reassurance. You are not insane. You are not flawed or broken. Instead, you are navigating a rigorous, transformative process, a path rarely attempted and even more rarely completed by humanity. While the attendant isolation, difficulty, and the real danger posed by collective unconscious forces are undeniable, so too is the magnificent prospect of existing as a fully conscious human being amidst a world primarily populated by unconscious actors. Your purpose was never to conform to collective delusion, it was to radically transcend it. This transcendence is not about achieving superiority, but about achieving wholeness. In this era, the world desperately requires awakened individuals, not to spearhead grand movements or amass disciples, but simply to stand as living proof that genuine consciousness is attainable. Every successful completion of individuation carves a minute fracture in the foundation of the collective unconscious, allowing more light and awareness to penetrate the darkness. You may feel utterly solitary in your awakening, yet you belong to an invisible, enduring lineage, a network of conscious individuals across history who have trod this same formidable path. Jung himself traversed it, his research participants charted its course, and now you are walking it. Understand that these 7 signs are not endpoints to be reached. They are a sophisticated map guiding an ongoing process of psychological transformation. The dismantling of the persona is not the obliteration of social connection, but rather the genesis of authentic relationship. The integration of the shadow is not carte blanche for evil, but the essential bedrock of conscious morality. Withdrawal from the collective unconscious is not a symptom of mental pathology, but a necessary act of psychological differentiation. The cessation of projection is not emotional coldness, but the embracing of radical responsibility. The label of insanity is not an objective truth, but a collective defense mechanism. Emotional autonomy is not synonymous with isolation, but with inherent sovereignty. Finally, the conscious return is not conformity, but intentional, aware participation. Jung dedicated his life to studying these archetypal patterns, precisely because he had experienced them firsthand. His harrowing confrontation with the unconscious between 1913 and 1919 constituted his own profound awakening. He meticulously documented this journey in The Red Book, understanding that future awakened individuals would require evidence that their experiences were shared, not singular. Thus, he founded analytical psychology, offering it as a conceptual map for those who dared to follow the same terrifying itinerary. Crucially, he furnished us with the language necessary to name experiences the collective unconscious strives desperately to keep unnamed and unknown. This corpus of knowledge is Jung's most formidable and dangerous protocol, simply because once recognized, it is impossible to unsee. If these 7 signs become apparent within your own psyche, you can no longer feign sleep. If you observe them in others, the significance cannot be erased from your awareness. This indelible knowledge brands you as an individual who perceives the reality beyond collective delusion. While this vision makes you a destabilizing threat to systems predicated on unconsciousness, it simultaneously renders you indispensable to the advancement of consciousness itself. Here lies the profound paradox Jung grasps so completely. The collective unconscious necessitates awakened individuals even while actively attempting their destruction. The truly conscious do not crave power over others. They possess zero interest in control or manipulation. Their motivation is simply an absolute refusal to be controlled or manipulated themselves. This fundamental refusal, this resulting sovereignty, this distilled consciousness, is precisely what defines them as both dangerous and utterly necessary. They are dangerous to all who remain heavily invested in collective delusion, yet necessary for those poised and ready to awaken. Your mission is not to awaken others. Your sole responsibility is the continuous maintenance of your own consciousness. Nevertheless, whether by intention or accident, your state of awareness inevitably generates powerful ripples throughout the collective unconscious. Reflect briefly on the earlier clinical illustration, the man who presented seemingly normal yet was defined by the 7 signs. Therapeutic intervention was not aimed at forcing conformity, but at equipping him to successfully navigate reality as a conscious being. Through this intensive process, he mastered the art of honoring solitude without succumbing to isolation, utilizing shadow awareness without falling into cynicism, and upholding emotional sovereignty without sacrificing compassion. He learned, ultimately, to operate in the world as a conscious participant, rather than being relegated to the status of an unconscious actor. This is the blueprint of individuation realized in practical life. The conscious, awakened life is in no way easier than the unconscious one. By every objective metric, it is profoundly harder. You are forced to witness suffering that cannot be unseen, recognize patterns that cannot be ignored, and embrace responsibility from which there is no escape. Yet, you simultaneously access a depth of meaning unavailable to the unconscious mind. You inhabit reality, not shared delusion. You achieve total self-knowledge, not partial acquaintance. You engage in authentic connection, rather than merely performing social interaction. This willingness to trade temporal comfort for profound consciousness is the fundamental demand of true awakening. Jung postulated that humanity is invariably progressing toward higher consciousness, viewing awakened individuals as the vanguard of this evolutionary process. He asserted that consciousness is inevitable. The central question is merely whether we achieve it intentionally through the discipline of individuation, or whether it is violently imposed upon us through protracted collective suffering. The awakened individual thus functions as irrefutable evidence that conscious evolution is viable, demonstrating humanity's capacity to transcend collective programming and live exclusively from authentic awareness. If you are engaging with this material, it is highly likely you recognize these signs: the shattered persona, the accepted shadow, the necessary withdrawal, the lost projection, the label of insanity, the emotional autonomy, the conscious return within yourself or someone close. These are not disparate traits. They are 7 integrated facets of a singular transformation: the death of the unconscious self and the birth of the conscious self. Jung termed this process individuation. Others describe it as awakening or enlightenment. The specific nomenclature is less critical than the reality of the experience. What truly matters is that you are not undergoing this alone, even when the feeling of isolation is absolute. What matters is that your rising consciousness serves a purpose far greater than your personal journey. What matters is that Jung furnished us with the maps, the language, and the profound validation for a journey the collective unconscious actively seeks to keep silenced. You walk a well-trodden, historical path. You will be categorized, pathologized, and excluded by the masses. But in exchange, you will attain a freedom most humans cannot even conceive. This is the unequivocal promise and the terrible price of awakening. These 7 signs of the truly awakened are not merits to be chased. They are the unavoidable, organic consequences of becoming conscious within an unconscious world. If you possess them, you earn them through harrowing experiences you likely would never have chosen. If you recognize them in others, you are observing rare individuals who have achieved a transformation most people actively flee. Offer them respect. They are not performing enlightenment, they are living consciousness. And consciousness, as Jung realized, remains the single most dangerous, yet most necessary force driving human evolution. Your personal awakening matters not because it makes you unique, but because consciousness itself is the most precious resource. Every soul who successfully navigates this transformation contributes invaluable wisdom to the collective pool of human awareness. You are not undertaking this transformation solely for yourself, but for every generation that follows, making the road slightly clearer for those who tread behind. This is the true mechanism of evolution, not through sudden, dramatic leaps, but through individual willingness to transform completely.